The morning sun stretched its golden arms across the tranquil lake, painting ripples of light over the glassy water. Birds called from the nearby trees, and a soft mist lingered above the shoreline like a curtain between dreams and daybreak. The scene was peaceful, almost sacred, the kind of morning that invited quiet reflection. But peace has a way of being disrupted by misunderstanding, and on this particular day a small moment would become a big story. A lone fisherman, calm, focused, and clearly at home on the water, had just anchored his modest boat near a shaded patch along the lake's edge. He loved this spot. It was quiet, shielded from the wind, and ideal for catching the early bite. The rhythmic sound of the water against his hull felt almost meditative. With each gentle sway he adjusted his line, listening to nature's subtle symphony. Then came the sound that would shatter the stillness. A voice sharp enough to slice through the air. "Excuse me, you can't park your boat there." Startled, he turned to see a woman standing on the dock, arms folded, sunglasses glinting in the sun. Her tone was brisk, commanding, as if issuing an order rather than making an inquiry. She wore the expression of someone used to being obeyed, not questioned. For a moment he simply blinked, unsure if she was talking to him. The lake, after all, was large and public, or so most people thought, but the way she looked at him left no room for doubt. She was pointing directly at his boat, her finger slicing through the calm like a dagger. "I'm talking to you," she repeated, louder this time. "You can't just set up here. This is private property." He adjusted his hat, glanced around the lake, and then back to her. There were no private property signs, no ropes, no markers, just open water and the usual morning quiet. Still, he met her tone with one of quiet politeness. "I didn't see any signs," he said evenly. "I've been fishing here for years." "Well, you're mistaken," she fired back. "My family comes here every summer. We know the owners personally, and they don't allow strangers docking in this area." Her certainty was unshakable, as though familiarity had turned into a sort of ownership in her mind. The man listened patiently, still calm, his eyes never leaving hers. He could feel the other people nearby beginning to watch. Walkers, early kayakers, a couple on the opposite bank. The energy had shifted. What had been a serene morning had now become a small public scene. The man could have argued, he could have told her off, matched her volume with his own, but instead he just breathed deeply, his patience a quiet shield. "I'm not in anyone's way," he said softly. "I'll only be here for a few hours." That only seemed to fuel her indignation. "That's not the point," she snapped. "Rules are rules. People like you can't just show up wherever you please." Her words hung in the air, harsh and absolute. A ripple of discomfort spread among the bystanders. Something about her insistence felt out of place. Too aggressive for the moment. Too quick to assume. Yet the man didn't react. He simply sat, his hand resting on the side of the boat, eyes steady but kind. The more she demanded, the more his calm seemed to quietly expose the imbalance of the situation. Every few seconds the lake's gentle sounds tried to reclaim the silence, the plop of a fish, the whisper of reeds. But her voice kept cutting through, restless, insistent. What began as a simple misunderstanding was fast becoming a public confrontation. And yet, behind his steady demeanor, the man was thinking not of anger, but of understanding. He had seen this before. People who let their assumptions steer them more than facts ever could. He wasn't angry. He was almost sad for her. Because somewhere beneath her outrage he sensed fear. Fear of being wrong, fear of losing control, fear of realizing the world didn't revolve around her perception of it. The onlookers whispered now, trading quiet remarks. Some shook their heads, others watched silently, waiting to see how it would end. The air grew heavier, the woman's tone sharper, but the man just stayed still, like the calm eye of a brewing storm. He didn't yet know that this moment, this seemingly small lakeside exchange, would ripple much farther than either of them could imagine. What began as a mere complaint was, at its core, a misunderstanding, a simple error of judgment magnified by certainty. The woman, so sure of her claim, had built an entire story in her mind before even knowing who she was speaking to. She saw a man on a boat, in her area, and instantly drew conclusions. He must not belong there. He must be in the wrong. He must move. It wasn't malice that fueled her, not at first. It was a dangerous mix of entitlement and presumption. As she continued to speak, her tone grew increasingly defensive, as if the more she talked, the more she needed to justify her behavior. Her body language, rigid arms, tapping foot, tilted chin, betrayed an inner insecurity. It wasn't really about the boat at all. It was about her belief that she was protecting something. Her place, her rules, her version of order. The man, on the other hand, represented everything outside her control. He was calm when she was tense, composed when she was flustered, unbothered when she was spiraling. It's unsettling when someone refuses to react the way you expect them to, and that was exactly what was happening. Her irritation only grew because his stillness reflected her agitation back at her. For him, this wasn't new. He had dealt with misunderstanding before, had seen how quick people could be to assume before they asked. It no longer surprised him, it only saddened him. But he believed in giving people the chance to see their own mistake, not through shouting or humiliation, but through quiet truth. She didn't realize yet that the very person she was confronting held more right to that lake than anyone else standing there. In fact, her assumptions couldn't have been further from the truth. But assumptions are powerful. They fill the gaps in what we don't know with stories we invent. To her, he was a trespasser. To him, she was just another soul caught in the habit of judging before understanding. The murmurs from the nearby dock grew louder. People were starting to take sides, though no one truly knew what the facts were. It was human nature at play, to form opinions quickly, to seek validation from others who agreed, to turn a simple disagreement into a public drama. Yet, amid all this, the man remained the same, still, grounded, quietly waiting for the storm of words to pass. Every so often he glanced out across the water, watching the sunlight shift over its surface. The lake didn't care who was right or wrong. It just reflected what was there. This moment, this clash of assumption and patience, would soon lead to something far greater than either of them expected. It wasn't just about a boat, or a dock, or a perceived boundary. It was about truth quietly waiting to be seen. The woman's voice carried across the lake like a sharp gust of wind, cutting through the soft hum of morning insects and the distant calls of waterfowl. Her words had weight, not because of what she said, but because of how she said it. Fast, clipped, each syllable punctuated by frustration. She was trying to control the situation with sheer force of tone. But the man in the boat didn't rise to meet her energy. His calmness stood like a wall of water against her storm. He looked at her steadily, not with defiance but with patience, the kind of patience that comes from a lifetime of choosing peace over pride. His eyes, gentle yet clear, didn't flinch when she stepped closer to the edge of the dock, waving her arms as though she could command the entire lake to obey her voice. "Did you not hear me?" she demanded again, her volume increasing. "You're not supposed to be there." He reeled in his line slowly, methodically, as though every motion had a purpose. The line whispered against the reel. The lure surfaced, glinting in the sunlight, and he set it neatly on the side of the boat. Only then did he respond, his voice calm but firm, the kind of voice that didn't need to shout to be heard. "I heard you," he said evenly, "and I assure you, I'm not breaking any rules." That sentence, spoken in such measured tones, had an effect she hadn't expected. It didn't challenge her directly, but it didn't yield either. It was balanced, controlled, a mirror to her chaos. For a moment she blinked, momentarily thrown off by his composure. Then, as though realizing she'd lost a step, she recovered and doubled down. "I just told you this is private property," she snapped. "You can't fish here. You people always think the rules don't apply to you." He didn't react to the sting in her words. Instead, he looked down at the lake again, as if seeking his reflection there. The ripples distorted his face, but not his composure. Every movement he made was deliberate. He lifted a small thermos from beside him, unscrewed the lid, and took a slow sip. The small, ordinary act seemed almost symbolic. It said, without words, that he wasn't going to be pulled into her whirlwind. Around them, the air began to shift. The sound of conversation floated from nearby docks. People had begun to notice. A couple paused their morning walk to glance in their direction. A young man jogging by slowed to see what was happening. Even a family setting up a picnic by the shore turned their heads. The lake, moments ago so peaceful, was now the stage for a scene neither of them had intended to create. But the man didn't play to the crowd. He spoke only when necessary. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "this lake is open to the public. I've fished here every weekend for a long time. I'm not trying to cause any trouble." The woman's face tightened. "You're mistaken," she said sharply. "My friends own one of the cabins nearby, and they said nobody's allowed in this section. You need to move your boat right now." Her words carried a note of absolute certainty, the kind that doesn't come from knowledge, but from assumption dressed as authority. The man regarded her for a moment, then looked past her toward the waterline. His patience wasn't weakness, it was rooted in understanding. He knew something she didn't, something that made her indignation almost tragic in its blindness. The more she pushed, the more her frustration seemed to unravel her. It wasn't just about the lake anymore. It was about control, pride, and the illusion of ownership. She was fighting not only him, but the quiet reality that she might be wrong. He finally sat down his thermos, folded his hands, and said in a tone that was neither defensive nor confrontational, "Sometimes it's better to ask before assuming." At this point he perceived Belle assuming more, and was impatient. It was a simple sentence, but it landed like a stone in the still water. The ripples of silence that followed carried more weight than any argument could. Her lips pressed together. The onlookers, sensing something deeper happening beneath the surface, waited for what would come next. His calmness wasn't just a reaction, it was a message. It showed that strength doesn't always roar, it sometimes whispers, and as her energy met his serenity, it began to dissipate like wind losing power over the waves. Still, she stood there, caught between doubt and pride. Her voice softened slightly, though her posture stayed rigid. "Well, if you're so sure," she muttered, "we'll just see what the authorities have to say about it." "Geo cabezos." He nodded once, unbothered. "You're welcome to call them," he said simply, then cast his line back into the water. The lure landed with a quiet splash. The circle it made expanded slowly, erasing the tension for just a moment before it returned. The crowd around them murmured again, some shaking their heads, others whispering that maybe the woman should just let it go. But she couldn't. Something inside her refused to step back. Maybe it was embarrassment, maybe it was habit, but she stayed locked in place, watching him with narrowed eyes as if waiting for him to falter. He didn't. His calmness met her confrontation and absorbed it completely. The more she pushed, the more the situation revealed itself for what it was, not a conflict of right and wrong, but a test of patience and perception. The gathering audience. By now the lakeside had grown noticeably still. Conversations had tapered off, replaced by low whispers and curious glances. What had started as a two-person disagreement had become a spectacle. People were drawn to conflict the way moths are drawn to light. It pulled at their attention, even when they knew they should look away. A few teenagers leaned on their bikes near the trail, pretending to check their phones while clearly eavesdropping. A man with a camera slung around his neck stood frozen mid-step, unsure whether to keep walking or stay to see how it all played out. Even the family by the picnic area seemed to have paused mid-bite, watching from behind their cooler. The woman felt the eyes on her, and that only seemed to fuel her need to prove herself right. She straightened her back, lifted her chin, and projected her voice louder, as if performing for an invisible jury. "I'm telling you, you can't just take over this space," she declared, gesturing toward the water, like a prosecutor pointing at evidence. "This lake has rules. You can't just act like you own it." Her words echoed over the surface, bouncing off the stillness like thrown pebbles. The irony of her statement would later become the twist no one expected. The man said nothing at first. He reeled in his line again, slow and rhythmic, as though the whole world hadn't shifted its focus onto them. His silence was infuriating to her, yet strangely magnetic to everyone else. It wasn't the silence of defeat. It was the silence of someone who knew exactly where he stood. The crowd began to whisper, their opinions forming in hushed tones. "She's really going off on him," one man said quietly. "Well, doesn't he just say something?" another replied. "Maybe he doesn't have to," someone else murmured. A sense of anticipation thickened in the air, the kind that always precedes a revelation. The woman's confidence began to waver, though she tried to mask it with more volume. "Don't just ignore me," she said sharply. "If you don't move that boat, I will call security." Still calm, still steady, he replied, "You can call whoever you'd like." His tone wasn't dismissive, it was peaceful, almost kind. That kindness, more than anything, made her falter. Every face watching could feel it, that unspoken shift in power. Not the power of domination or defiance, but the quiet kind that comes from truth, the energy that can't be faked, because it comes from knowing you're standing on solid ground. As she fumbled for her phone, muttering about numbers and property lines, the onlookers exchanged glances. Some began to record, not out of mockery, but because they sensed something memorable was unfolding, something that carried a lesson deeper than the argument itself. The man, unfazed, turned his gaze toward the horizon. The sun had climbed higher now, glimmering over the water like liquid gold. The ripples danced beneath his boat, gentle and constant, as though reminding everyone present that nature doesn't bend to pride or noise. It moves at its own pace, responding only to balance. He sat quietly, waiting not for her to stop talking, but for the truth to surface in its own time. The crowd, the confrontation, the whispers, everything around them seemed to fade into the steady rhythm of the lake. The air held a strange tension, not of hostility but of anticipation. Something was coming, and though no one knew exactly what, every eye stayed fixed on the man in the boat, whose calm had begun to tell a story all its own. The woman's frustration began to boil over. Her voice, once sharp, now rang across the water with a kind of desperate insistence, as if sheer volume could turn her assumptions into truth. She stood rigid on the dock, one hand gripping her phone, the other gesturing toward the man as though pointing out a crime in progress. Her words came fast, tumbling one over another, each sentence an attempt to claim authority that wasn't truly hers to claim. "You can't just sit there," she shouted, pacing along the dock's edge. "I've told you 3 times already. This part of the lake is private. The owners don't allow strangers to fish here. You need to move your boat, now." Her echo bounced off the water and disappeared into the trees. The man, seated quietly in his small boat, continued to meet her outburst with a stillness that seemed almost unnatural in its restraint. His fingers rested loosely on the side of the vessel, and his eyes were calm, observing, patient. He didn't flinch when her words turned sharper. He didn't interrupt when she began muttering under her breath about people who didn't follow rules. For him, her anger was like a passing storm. He had learned long ago that tempests burn themselves out faster when they aren't met with resistance. The real power, he knew, came not from control but from presence, from being centered when the world around you wasn't. But she didn't see it that way. His composure only made her angrier. "Oh, don't just sit there pretending you don't hear me," she snapped, her voice cracking slightly. "I'm serious. If you don't move that boat in the next minute, I'm calling the authorities." He looked up at her then, not in defiance but with a kind of quiet empathy that disarmed more than it challenged. His voice came low and steady, carrying easily over the water. "You're free to do that, ma'am," he said simply. The answer only fueled her indignation. She spun toward the group of onlookers who had gathered at the nearby dock and shoreline. "You all heard me, right? He's trespassing. He's not supposed to be here." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some shrugged, others whispered to one another. The morning air was thick with curiosity, discomfort, and the strange electricity that comes when a simple disagreement turns into a public spectacle. One older man by the dock tried to interject gently, "Ma'am, I don't think this section's private. The signs down the trail don't say anything about restrictions." She waved him off. "I know what I'm talking about. My friends have been coming here for years, and they said no outsiders are allowed to dock in this area." The words, outsiders, lingered in the air like smoke. Her tone had shifted from confident to defensive, and though she was trying to project authority, her voice wavered at the edges. She was starting to sense, even if she didn't admit it, that something about this confrontation wasn't going the way she'd imagined. The man watched her quietly. His patience wasn't condescension, it was deliberate, like someone allowing truth to reveal itself instead of forcing it out. He reached for his tackle box, checked his bait, and prepared another cast. The crowd's eyes followed him, waiting to see how he would respond to the woman's escalating demands. He crossed her arms and let out an exasperated sigh. "You're just going to ignore me, then?" "I'm not ignoring you," he said calmly. "I'm just not arguing with you." The simplicity of his words landed harder than any rebuttal could have. It made her pause, only for a heartbeat, but that heartbeat was long enough for doubt to start creeping in. Still, pride pushed her forward. "Well, don't say I didn't warn you," she said, thumbing at her phone screen as she began to make a call. Her tone was full of self-righteous certainty. She wanted the crowd to see her as the responsible one, the enforcer of rules. But underneath the performance, her confidence was thinning. Meanwhile, the man remained steady, as if he had seen this play out many times before. His every movement was unhurried. He wasn't smug, and he wasn't nervous. It was the kind of composure that comes from knowing something the other person doesn't yet understand. The murmuring among the spectators grew louder. Some shifted uncomfortably, others whispered guesses about who was in the right. The air felt heavy with tension, but there was also a strange anticipation, as though everyone sensed that something unexpected was about to happen. The woman kept pacing. Her frustration had reached that point where it wasn't really about the situation anymore, it was about saving face. She wanted to be proven right, not because she truly believed she was, but because the crowd was watching. The more people gathered, the more she felt the invisible pressure to perform. The man, however, seemed immune to it all. He adjusted his rod, cast another line, and sat back as the lure disappeared beneath the glimmering surface of the lake. His stillness was a mirror to her agitation, and that quiet contrast spoke louder than any words could. Finally, she turned to the onlookers again, seeking validation. "Can you believe this? He's acting like he owns the place," she said, her voice rising once more. A few people exchanged glances, but no one answered. Her words, once commanding, now seemed hollow against the calm of the man and the quiet ripple of the water. The balance of energy was shifting, though she couldn't yet see how dramatically it would turn. The moment of truth approaches. The air around the dock had changed. The tension was still there, but beneath it was a quiet sense of inevitability, as if everyone present could feel that the situation was about to take an unexpected turn. The woman stood at the edge of the dock, phone still in hand, muttering under her breath as she scrolled through contacts. Her frustration had settled into something more brittle, a kind of anxious determination that made her voice tremble when she spoke. "You're going to regret this," she said finally, more to herself than to him. The man looked up again, his gaze steady, his expression unreadable. He had been patient long enough. It wasn't anger that moved him now, it was a decision. The moment for quiet tolerance had passed, and in its place came a calm certainty that it was time to reveal the truth. He reached into the small waterproof satchel that rested beside his seat. The motion was slow, deliberate, the kind of movement that drew the attention of everyone watching. Even the woman paused mid-sentence, her voice catching slightly as she saw him unzip the bag. The crowd leaned forward, curiosity rippling through the air like the faint breeze that stirred the surface of the lake. From inside he pulled out a folder. It wasn't large or ornate, just a simple, weathered binder, the kind that looked well-handled, trusted. He set it on his lap for a moment, then opened it, flipping through a few clear sleeves that held neatly arranged documents. The woman frowned. "What is that supposed to be?" she asked, though her tone had softened. The bravado in her voice was starting to fade, replaced by uncertainty. Without responding right away, he carefully took out one of the papers, held it up so that she, and everyone else watching, could see it clearly. The document was printed on official letterhead, stamped and signed in several places. The logo at the top was instantly recognizable to anyone familiar with property law or local records. "This," he said evenly, "is the deed to the lake." The words didn't land all at once. There was a pause, a stillness so complete that even the birds seemed to stop their song. The woman blinked, her mouth slightly open, as though she hadn't heard him correctly. "All right," she said finally, her voice small, almost a whisper. He didn't repeat himself. Instead, he held the document steady in the sunlight. Those close enough to see leaned in, reading the text that confirmed what he'd just said. The deed bore his full name, notarized and official, declaring ownership of the very body of water they stood beside. A collective murmur rippled through the crowd. Some gasped softly, others exchanged incredulous looks. The man didn't need to explain further. The truth was right there in black and white. The woman took a hesitant step closer to the edge of the dock. Her earlier certainty dissolved, replaced by visible disbelief. "That's not possible," she said faintly. "No one owns an entire lake." He gave a small, almost imperceptible smile. Not smug, but knowing. "This one's privately held," he said. "Has been for generations. My grandfather bought it decades ago. I just maintain it now." The crowd's whispers grew louder. Phones that had been raised to record lowered slightly, as if even those filming understood they were witnessing something beyond entertainment. There was a strange silence in the woman's eyes, a dawning realization that every word she'd spoken, every demand she'd made, had been built on a false foundation. Her phone hung loosely at her side now. The confidence in her posture was gone, replaced by hesitation. The air between them was heavy, but not with anger, rather with the quiet gravity of truth making itself known. The man looked at her kindly, though there was a depth in his eyes that said he'd experienced moments like this before. He didn't gloat, didn't mock, didn't even raise his voice. He simply placed the document back into its sleeve, closed the folder, and rested it on his lap once more. The lake seemed to shimmer a little brighter under the late morning sun. The ripples that had carried tension now moved freely, gliding across the surface as if reflecting the calm that had always been his to begin with. The woman stood there, speechless, her earlier outrage replaced by a silence that spoke volumes. And though no one moved, it was clear that the balance between them had shifted completely. The confrontation that began with demands was now transforming into something else, something humbling, something that would soon reveal the deeper meaning behind it. The silence that followed his words was almost physical, stretching across the lake like a held breath. The sunlight glinted off the paper in his hands, its embossed seal catching the eye of everyone watching. The woman's expression shifted from disbelief to confusion, her lips parting slightly as if trying to form a protest she no longer believed in. The calm weight of his statement left no room for argument. Every line on the document was clear, official, undeniable. The murmurs from the crowd deepened, some whispering in astonishment, others simply standing frozen, watching as the moment settled into reality. Her face flushed with color, not from anger now, but from the sting of realization. The phone that had moments ago been her symbol of authority hung uselessly in her hand. She looked from him to the lake, as if trying to reconcile the enormity of what she'd just learned. The man, still seated, held her gaze with quiet steadiness. There was no trace of triumph in his eyes, no hint of smug satisfaction. It was the kind of look that carried both understanding and disappointment, a silent reminder of how easily pride can blind perception. He placed the papers carefully back into his satchel, every movement unhurried, deliberate. The woman swallowed hard, her breath shaky, her posture softening. The crowd remained hushed, their earlier anticipation replaced with respect for the unexpected turn. A few people exchanged glances, some nodding subtly as if acknowledging the quiet power of truth revealed without force or fanfare. A stunning silence falls. The air around the dock was still now, heavy but calm. The woman who had once commanded the scene with her voice could only stand there, eyes wide, words gone. The lake mirrored everything, the ripples, the light, the faces of those watching, but offered no judgment. The man simply looked out over the water, his expression composed, as if allowing the peace that had always been his to return fully at last. When he finally spoke again, his voice was softer than the breeze moving across the water. "It's all right," he said, and the simplicity of those words carried more power than any reprimand could. The woman looked at him, her eyes flickering with embarrassment and something like remorse. He didn't gloat or remind her of her mistake. Instead, he offered her a moment to breathe, to gather what was left of her pride with dignity. His calm presence turned the tension into quiet reflection. Around them the crowd remained still, watching as his composure transformed the energy of the moment from confrontation to compassion. A lesson echoes across the shore. The silence that followed became its own message, carried by the wind and the whisper of the water. People began to look at one another differently, recognizing the truth beneath what they had witnessed. The woman, humbled and quiet now, stepped back from the edge of the dock, her certainty replaced by understanding, and the lake returned to peace once more. The days that followed the incident at the lake carried a strange stillness for the woman. What had once felt like an unshakable sense of control now felt fragile, like something she had built on air. The moment replayed in her mind again and again, the calmness in his voice, the look in his eyes, the quiet strength that had stopped her anger in its track. She thought of how small her voice had sounded after he revealed the truth, how the crowd had gone silent, not because of her words, but because of his. That silence haunted her more than any argument could have. At first she tried to dismiss it, telling herself that anyone would have made the same mistake. But late at night, when the house was quiet and the lake wind brushed softly against her window, she felt the weight of her own pride. It wasn't just that she had been wrong, it was how certain she had been of her own rightness. She had turned her assumptions into truth, and treated a stranger with hostility, not curiosity. That realization, slow and steady, began to unravel something deep inside her. A week later, she found herself walking the same trail that led down to the dock. The morning light was different this time, softer, humbler somehow, as though the lake itself remembered. She carried no phone, no anger, no self-assured expression. Only a folded note in her hand and a quiet resolve in her heart. She had heard from one of the locals that the man often came by in the mornings to fish, just as he always had. When she reached the water, she spotted him instantly. The same small boat, the same steady posture, the same peace surrounding him like a quiet halo. He looked up when he heard her footsteps, but didn't speak right away. There was no resentment in his eyes, no guarded distance, only recognition and perhaps the faintest trace of understanding. She stopped a few feet from the edge of the dock. "I owe you an apology," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I was wrong. I didn't ask questions. I assumed things I shouldn't have. I embarrassed myself, and I disrespected you." For a long moment he said nothing. The water lapped gently against the wood, filling the silence between them. Then, with the same calm that had defined him before, he nodded once. "Thank you," he said simply. "That takes courage." His words, kind and unadorned, brought an unexpected sting of tears to her eyes. "I've been thinking about it every day since," she admitted. "I don't know why I reacted the way I did. I thought I was standing up for what was right. But really, I think I just wanted to feel in control. I'm sorry for that." He smiled faintly, the kind of smile that carried forgiveness without words. "Sometimes we act from habit," he said. "We defend what we think is ours, even when it never was." She nodded slowly, the truth of it sinking deep. "You didn't have to be kind to me," she said after a pause. "You could have humiliated me. You could have made a scene after what I said." "I don't see the point in that," he replied. "We all make mistakes. The only difference is what we do after we see them." His tone was not moralizing, it was gentle, reflective. That was what made it powerful. There was no bitterness, no hidden edge. Just a quiet truth that met her humility halfway. For the first time in years she felt something unburdened within her, the tightness in her chest, the constant need to be right, the habit of speaking before understanding. She handed him the folded note she had brought. "I wanted you to have this," she said. He hesitated before taking it, opening it carefully. Inside, written in careful script, were only a few sentences. "Thank you for teaching me a lesson I didn't know I needed. The lake feels different to me now, not as a place I thought I owned, but as something that belongs to everyone who respects it." He looked at the note for a moment, then back at her. "You didn't have to write this," he said quietly. "I did," she replied, "because I needed to mean it." He tucked the note into his bag and offered a small nod of gratitude. "You know," he said, glancing out across the water, "the lake's funny that way. It reflects what's shown to it. That day, it showed us both something about ourselves." She followed his gaze. The water shimmered under the morning light, clear and vast. "It did," she agreed softly. "And I don't think I'll ever forget it." From that day forward, her visits to the lake took on a different tone. She began walking there regularly, not to claim space, but to find quiet. She'd often see him at a distance, casting his line with the same slow rhythm, and she'd lift a hand in greeting. Sometimes he waved back. Sometimes he just smiled. They didn't speak much after that, but they didn't need to. The apology had said everything words could say, and the silence that followed was one of peace, not tension. She began to notice things she had never noticed before: the shimmer of light on the water, the delicate hum of insects, the way the trees seemed to lean closer to the shore as if listening. It was as if the world had widened around her, and her perspective with it. The lake had once been a stage for her pride, now it was a mirror for her growth. And though she didn't tell many people about what had happened that day, she carried the lesson in her conversations, her tone, her choices. When she felt the urge to speak too quickly or assume too much, she remembered the man in the boat and the quiet strength it took to remain kind under pressure. That image became her reminder, a symbol of the kind of person she wanted to become. The motto, "Power lies in patience." The memory of that morning became a quiet legend around the lake. People told it in fragments. The woman who tried to confront a fisherman and learned, to everyone's surprise, that he owned the very lake she claimed to protect. But those who had been there remembered more than the shock. They remembered the calm in his demeanor, the grace that transformed conflict into understanding. It wasn't just a story about ownership or pride. It was about the strength of restraint, the kind of power that doesn't shout, but teaches through example. The man never spoke of it beyond what was necessary. To him it was just another morning, another chance to practice patience in a world too quick to anger. But the ripple of that encounter extended far beyond the water's edge. It changed how people thought about one another. The locals became gentler with their words, slower with their assumptions. Even the regulars who fished there often spoke of the lesson of the lake with a kind of reverence. The woman, too, changed in quiet, profound ways. The sharpness that once colored her voice softened over time. She learned to listen more, to approach others with curiosity rather than certainty. Her friends noticed it first, how she paused before reacting, how she asked questions instead of issuing declarations. They didn't know why, but she did. She carried that day like a stone polished smooth by water, something once rough, now shaped into grace. The lake became a sanctuary for both of them, though in different ways. For him it remained a place of peace and continuity. For her it became a symbol of transformation, a reminder that humility doesn't weaken a person, it strengthens them. The power that day hadn't belonged to the one who shouted loudest or claimed the most authority. It had belonged to the one who stayed still, who listened, who allowed truth to speak for itself. Patience had revealed what anger tried to hide. Kindness had done what confrontation never could. And in that simple, quiet act of grace, the man had taught everyone watching that real strength is not about domination. It's about mastery of the self. Long after the event faded from daily talk, its essence lingered in memory. Whenever someone new visited the lake, they might hear a passing mention, "Be careful who you judge. You never know who owns the water you're standing beside." But the wiser ones, those who understood the story's deeper current, would smile knowingly and say, "No one really owns the lake. It just teaches us who we are." In that the story found its true meaning. The man's calm wasn't about victory, and the woman's apology wasn't about defeat. It was about something timeless, the quiet realization that patience is power, that grace is greater than pride, and that understanding is the real form of strength. If this story moved you, if it made you think twice about patience, grace, or the quiet power of humility, Then stay connected with A1 Storyteller, where every tale reminds us that empathy and understanding still matter. Tap subscribe, hit the notification bell, and like this video to keep powerful storytelling alive. Your support helps these messages reach more hearts and minds, turning simple moments into lasting inspiration. Share this story with someone who needs a reminder that calmness can be strength, forgiveness can be courage, and every story can change the way we see the world.